are going to do a Northern Pass project update today, and I have with me Jack Savage from the New Hampshire Forest Society, and he is going to be giving us some updates on what is going on right now. I wanted to do a quick overview for those of you who are not familiar with the project.
A proposal for a transmission line. There's a partnership between Hydro-Quebec out of Canada, Crown Corporation of Canada, and Northeast Utilities, which is merged with NSTAR. And Northeast Utilities owns Public Services of New Hampshire, which we know here in the state. And their proposal is to build a 187-mile transmission line to allow Hydro-Quebec to export more large-scale hydropower from Canada through New Hampshire, and to meet demands that they perceive will come in the future in southern New England.
Right. Okay. So that the project was announced 3 years ago. Here we are 3 years later. We have had some legislation passed to keep them from taking eminent domain, and now there is legislation currently in the State House that has to do with burying the line, although I believe it's a voluntary burial or a preferral for line burial, if I'm not
Right. So here's the situation. This is not a project that came out of any determination of need for New England, or certainly not for New Hampshire. So it's not that we need the power, or that any entity charged with determining our power needs has said that we need the power. This is a project that would enable Hydro-Quebec to exclusively to use a line to sell power to Hydro-Quebec US, who then would look to sell it on the open market if they could, depending on price and availability and so forth. And so our regulatory procedures aren't perfectly set up in order to deal with the so-called merchant line. And one of the first things that was dealt with was the question of whether or not a private commercial project like Northern Pass could avail itself of the government's power of eminent domain. As you correctly stated, Heather, it was a couple of years ago now that Governor Lynch signed into a bill that clarified our Constitution, New Hampshire's Constitution, to make it eminently clear that a merchant project like Northern Pass cannot petition the Public Utilities Commission to use eminent domain. And the last such transaction being $4 million for 20 acres of land.
Okay, so that comes in from Pittsburgh. That's the entrance point?
That's right, yeah. So the proposed route, which was amended this past end of June.
Right, so this is important.
Right. The proposal was amended in the application to the Federal Department of Energy for a required presidential permit. And what they proposed then was to enter in Pittsburgh and proceed down through Coos County and through the White Mountain National Forest onto Franklin, where they would build a converter station, convert the direct current power to AC, and move from there through Canterbury, Concord, Pembroke, and then eastward over to Deerfield, where there's a node on the New England grid that would enable them to get the power where the demand is in southern New England. They have any number of problems with that proposed route. One, from the Forest Society's perspective, they do not have legal access to that route. They're proposing to bury a short section of the line in Clarksville underneath land that we own.
8 miles out of 187?
Yeah, that's the total burial. That particular section in Clarksville is shorter than that.
Okay.
It doesn't really matter whether it's an inch or a mile or what have you if it's on our private property.
But it's such a small amount in comparison to the huge...
Right, that's a good point.
That's the whole point.
They attempted to sort of say, look, we listened, we're burying part of it. But they in fact increased it from 180 miles to 187 miles and proposed to bury it. A short section, 7 miles.
And part of it is where you had stated land that you own. This is a huge bone of contention. They want to
Right.
bury it under, and they claim they can do that because part of the land that you own is along a road?
That's correct. We
Okay.
own both sides and underneath the road, and,
Okay.
and they would like to go underneath dirt that we own. And we think that without eminent domain, and our lawyers think that without eminent domain, they cannot legally do that.
Okay.
And so we've actually asked the Department of Energy to suspend their application until such time that they can show that they have legal access to their proposed route.
Okay.
The other portion of the amended application that they submitted was they are continuing to suggest as an alternate to broach the Connecticut Lakes headwaters easement.
Which is totally illegal, correct?
We believe that's very much the case.
Okay.
Our attorneys put out a legal memo that outlined how it's the case.
Okay.
And there's been clear political support for the viability of that easement. So we've also asked the DOE to have them strike that alternate. The whole thing is a little bit odd in that the spirit of the application is that they should put forward their preferred route, but then take note of other alternative routes. How else could
Absolutely.
this be done? And their only alternative is this illegal short section that would broach an existing conservation easement, which is another reason that we and others have asked the Department of Energy, as part of the environmental impact statement that has to be done as part of the presidential permit, to look at other viable alternatives, including burial along transportation corridors.
Okay, so let's go to, there are so many minute aspects to this project that could keep us talking all day. Bottom line, it's a very, very controversial project because of certain aspects, one of which is just the stark fact that they are going to put large metal towers all the way down through the state, and they think they're heroes by burying essentially 8 miles, and they tell everybody they've listened. I totally disagree with that. I'll say that. Anyway, so now to make a stark contrast, first of all, they've said it's absolutely unaffordable to bury it, okay? But they never explain. They never explain why it is so expensive to bury it. They never outline a proposal as to why it's too expensive to bury it. And my own opinion is because they want to do it on there right away. So what we want to illustrate is our projects that are going up right now that are being buried, which you're going to tell us about in Vermont, that a new project that was just announced, that is a stark contrast to the Northern Pass, and yet will be in agreement with Hydro-Quebec as well. Am I correct?
Well, right. So the Forest Society and other organizations and individuals have suggested that a transmission like Northern Pass might be viable if it were buried, in particular along transportation corridors.
Right.
And as you've noted, Northern Pass's response to that is that if we have to bury it, there won't be any project. It's simply not economically feasible. And we haven't been certain that that was the case, and they have been asked, Northern Pass has been asked, well, where are you getting your figures at your projected cost? How do you know it's too expensive? What are your costs? And their costs have varied widely, and I think it's fair to say erred on the very, very high side. And the truth is that they haven't really looked at exactly what it would cost. And transmission developers will tell you that in order to really understand how much a specific route in a specific spot will cost to underground, you got to look at that specific route. And I think that's
Okay.
fair. However, there are other projects that are highly illustrative in terms of the viability of undergrounding transmission lines. And just recently, and I got to say, I think this is a game changer for Northern Pass. An outfit in Vermont has proposed to build a transmission line that would come down from Canada to deliver hydropower from Hydro-Quebec to southern New England by coming underneath Lake Champlain for about 100 miles and then bearing east towards southeast, towards Ludlow, Vermont, where they could do the same thing and get the power to where the demand is. And undergrounding the entire thing. And they've put a price tag on that 150-mile line of $1.2 billion. Well, Northern Pass's price tag for their overhead line is $1.4 billion. And so if you're of the mind that the energy goals that Northern Pass is claiming to be able to achieve, renewable power that could conceivably displace fossil fuel power and so forth, all of those energy goals could just as easily be accomplished by the project in Vermont. So if the goal is to bring another 1,000 megawatts of power to southern New England, that can be done without Northern Pass. So Northern Pass is only one of other projects proposing to do it, and the other projects do not have the damage and cost in New Hampshire's landscape that the other projects do. I think you know, Heather, that National Grid has proposed another line that would be undergrounded along I-95 in Maine. That's not necessarily for Hydro-Quebec, but has more to do with wind power up there.
Yes.
And the same company that's proposing this Vermont line is behind the Champlain-Hudson Power Express, which is a line that also would deliver hydropower to the New York grid by going under Lake Champlain and down underground into the metropolitan New York market. And so they're clearly looking to piggyback on their project that's already far along, the Champlain-Hudson Express, to bring an additional line down into Vermont. It makes perfect sense conceptually. And it just shows that even if you buy the idea that we may someday need or want the hydropower out of Quebec for southern New England, using old technology to build up to 150-foot towers across 187 miles of New Hampshire's landscape is not the only way you can do it.
Right.
And it doesn't necessarily cost more in order to do it a better way.
Agreed. So now it almost looks like then there's competition for the Northern Pass.
I think that's fair to say, there's competition. And here's the issue is, this is why I think it's a game changer and why Northern Pass is in a difficult position now. So why would New Hampshire ever burden itself with this overhead line when it's apparent that other companies are willing and able to underground a line in Maine, Vermont, New York? Why would New Hampshire stick out? Why would we put our tourism industry at risk? Why would we go against the will of so many thousands and thousands of people up and down the state in order to meet the needs of Northeast Utilities and Hydro-Quebec?
Right, for Connecticut.
I don't see how that happens as proposed. Okay. I don't see how politically they get that done, given that there's clearly viable alternatives on the table.
Well, I think that if Northeast Utilities wants to build a line, it makes sense that they would attempt to use this right-of-way, because there's a lot of money for them involved in this deal.
Right. So
that's where it comes in, that they would do it anyway against our will.
Well, they would attempt to.
They would attempt to do it, and they're hanging on.
Right.
Like
That raises the question. Well, why would Northern Pass persist?
Right.
And I think you're onto something here. That they have been fixated on the so-called existing right-of-way, the PSNH owned distribution right-of-way that doesn't necessarily have a clear legal authority to cite a private third-party transmission line, but nonetheless exists for distribution with 50-foot wooden towers.
Right.
Their NU is looking to monetize that right away.
That's right.
I think that's very clear.
That's
if
clear.
If they can make money by citing a private line along their right of way, that's good for them. That's more money in their pocket. And to consider instead burial along transportation corridors, where conceivably the state of New Hampshire could receive some revenue for hosting that transmission line, presents a revenue problem for Northeast Utilities. I don't necessarily sympathize with them particularly, because I don't think that we should be damaging places like the White Mountain National Forest, only to pad the bottom line of Northeast Utilities. But I think that's one thing that they're going to have problems with. And I think they probably are going to have some hard discussions internally to figure out, are we really interested in ending up with and building a transmission line, or are we only interested in beating our head against a political brick wall in order to do it the way that we want to do it? And that's the question they face. And when they make arguments about the potential need for this electricity, I think one can easily say that it's irresponsible to continue going forward on a doomed proposal when other options could happen more quickly. To that point, just this week, one of the analysts that follows Northeast Utilities
got the article. It's good.
Communicated to their own investors and said, look, we don't buy Northeast Utilities' estimate of when this might happen and whether it might happen. You know, they're saying that they're going to have this thing built by 2017. We don't think that's true. At best, it's going to be 2019, 2020,
or beyond,
if it happens. And it's going to be more expensive because they're not going to solve the problems they have with their current proposal. They're going to have to underground some portion of it at the very least. And I think that's right. I think they're on target. And so now we're looking at having the opportunity of time. Time enables the state to create a situation where Northern Pass or any other transmission developer can come forward with a proposal that makes sense for New Hampshire, doesn't destroy what we value here in New Hampshire, and also enables energy to be transmitted and money to be made. There is a win-win in all of this. And one has to think that Hydro-Quebec is looking south and saying, look, every day that we don't sell our electricity to the southern New England market is a day that we don't make money. And so this is going to be out to 2020 and may not happen ever at all. You know, we might see Hydro-Quebec pressuring Northern Pass to move forward on a proposal that is doable rather than beating their head against a wall on a proposal that isn't doable.
Okay, so the proposal between Northeast Utilities and Hydro-Quebec that comes through New Hampshire, that transmission, it was the transmission services agreement, the TSA that was done in 2008.
Mm-hmm.
So they proposed this, the beginnings of this transmission line in 2008 to FERC.
Right. So the federal government oversees the nature of the transmission services agreement. What are the financial arrangements between Hydro-Quebec and Northeast Utilities relative to the cost of building a line and transmitting the energy and so forth? And
okay, so I don't mean to interrupt you, but I had a thought.
Okay.
You know, I got hit by a little bit of nerves today, so I don't know why. I mean, we've talked so many times that all of a sudden the cameras go on and it's like, you know. Anyway, so they made this agreement and it expires in February of this year, right?
Of 2014.
2014,
right.
Which means that there could be some kind of pivotal decision made at that time, or will they hang on to it?
Well, you know, it's not that it's not like an agreement like that can't be renewed, but you know, it potentially provides an opportunity for any of the parties, I suppose, FERC or Hydro-Quebec or Northeast Utilities, to re-examine the fundamental aspect of their agreement. And much has changed since 2008.
Yes.
Not the least of which is the energy market itself. You know, natural gas has come in to dominate the market, so the competitive landscape for power suppliers has changed significantly. And so there may be any number of reasons to take a second look at that agreement, and that also you know, opens the door for taking a whole fresh look at Northern Pass and how to build it, and whether there's a way to build it that would overcome the objections of the majority of people in New Hampshire.
I think burial is what, I mean, not that people want foreign power, because that's a whole nother issue. That's a whole other issue. So, but we won't really broach that too much today, but the problem has always been the fact that it's going to destroy tourism and land values. And anybody who thinks they need a study to prove that is insane. There are people's properties that have just dropped in value, not even because the project's happened, but because it might happen.
That certainly appears to be the case. And from the Forest Society's standpoint, we come at this and we got involved in this because we have a legal and ethical obligation to defend existing conserved land. So whether it's White Mountain National Forest or our Washburn Family Forest or our Kaufman Forest in Stark or the Rocks in Bethlehem, all of which would be directly impacted by this proposed route. This is private commercial development on conserved land that is meant to prohibit such private commercial development. Right. And so, that's our purpose for being here.
And you guys have done a great job. I really believe that if you guys hadn't been fighting for this, and it might have already kind of been.
I don't know. I'm a very strong believer in the power of the grassroots local folks to affect change. Okay. When it matters and people pull together and make their wants and desires clear, I think that can affect positive change. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. We have been very involved.
And a strong opposition too.
But the amazing thing about this whole issue and this whole debate is the thousands of people who have come forward, people who never saw themselves as activists anyway, people who never imagined that they would stand up in front of an audience and make their feelings known, their objections known. And in many ways, this has created a whole new generation of engaged activist citizens who are determined to protect those values that are important to them. The other thing that I love to see is that New Hampshire people and people from Massachusetts who vacation here and own property here have been galvanized and forced by this issue to come forward and articulate what it is about New Hampshire that they love so much. Why do they care? Why, when they stand on a mountaintop and look out over, do they not want to see steel lattice towers and a transmission line? Why do they want to see? Why do they come here? Why do they find themselves rejuvenated by being here and absorbing that? And in our technical world, that is a wonderful thing to see.
Absolutely. And to have the strength of the opposition and then to have the strength of the Forest Society has been a powerful combination.
And there's other organizations. The Appalachian Mountain Club has been very involved. And if you haven't looked at it yet,
AMC,
you should go look at their video analysis of
I've seen it.
Where you will be able to see the towers from and so forth. It's very powerful
From a
stuff.
long ways away.
The Conservation Law Foundation has been very involved. Those are smart people who dig into the details of
That's true.
The federal and state process and pick apart the holes in applications where, Northern Pass glosses over certain aspects of their proposal. And here's the ironic thing about this. This is a proposal that was rolled out with a marketing campaign that somehow this energy was clean and green. And I think they thought that every environmental organization would jump on board to support it. In fact, the exact opposite has occurred. For different reasons, some organizations don't think that the large-scale flooding that Hydro-Quebec has caused to happen to generate this electricity is a good idea. And certainly it's not green or clean, but in any case, some for that reason, others for other reasons. But whether it's the Forest Society, AMC, CLF, Nature Conservancy, New Hampshire Audubon, other organizations like historic preservation organizations, they've all taken a close look at this and said, yeah, no, this isn't for New Hampshire. This isn't within keeping of New Hampshire's values, and we shouldn't allow this to happen. And some of the organizations don't think it should happen at all. Some are on the side of the Forest Society who leave the door open for it to happen in the right way. And we'll see how that shakes out. But I think today, Northern Pass faces a steep, if not impossible, climb to get permitted what they have proposed.
Absolutely agree. And that is highlighted by these other projects, New York, Vermont, Maine, and there's New Hampshire that want, this company wants the towers. So I think that is just an illustration of where the technology is going, and the Northern Pass needs to kind of give it up. Because they put their TSA agreement in 2008, it means that this project must have been conceived long before that. In order to have a prepared agreement in 2008, you've got to think that project was conceived.
Oh yeah,
long
absolutely.
Before that.
Sure, sure. And if you go back, you will see that some reporters covered the agreement, the FERC agreement, and so forth.
Okay.
It didn't really come into the general public's awareness until PSNH got together in Franklin and announced it in October of 2010. But it was on some people's radar prior to that. What's really interesting about that is that it was conceived at this point long ago, and it was conceived in a different energy environment and conceived in a different energy cost landscape. And so that's why I think this whole thing is starting to fall apart. And the window of opportunity for Northern Pass to come in and convince New Hampshire to allow the erection of more than 1,500 towers across 187 miles, I think it's closed.
I think it's closed too.
And there may be still an opportunity for a win-win for another transmission line through New Hampshire, but I think we're not going to see it.
Okay.
If it happens, it's not.
So
going
the
to
question, I guess I'm bringing all this up because they've invested so much in thinking that this line is going to work, and they're just like hanging on to the bitter end. And I'm wondering when they'll finally just kind of let go.
That's tough to predict. Look,
Yeah.
there's billions and billions and billions of dollars at stake
Yeah,
here.
that's true.
So there's a certain calculation that I don't know that they're making, but one can presume that they might be making, is that, look, if we spend another $1 million in paid advertising to try to convince people, and the return is billions and billions of dollars, then why not spend another $1 million and see what happens? They've been doing that for the last few months, trying to turn the tide of public opinion. I don't know that it's working necessarily. I think if the only thing you ever hear about Northern Pass is from Northern Pass, I think you have one view of it. If you do a little bit more research and come to understand what's really going on here, you quickly come to the conclusion of, I think most people in New Hampshire, which is that there may or may not be good reason to allow Hydro-Quebec to export more power to us, but we shouldn't necessarily buy into Northern Pass as not only the only way to do it, certainly not do that, but in any way an appropriate way to do it. It's just not.
Absolutely. All right, well, I'm pretty sure we've covered just about everything, although we could keep talking.
Can I say one more thing?
Be my guest.
It's a plug.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So the Forest Society is more than about Northern Pass, and
Yep.
for the last 6 months we've been working on a campaign to acquire some land, conserve some land on Mount Major, one of New Hampshire's iconic little peaks, favorite hiking spot. Some 80,000 people, we counted, some 80,000 people a year climb that mountain every
That's a
year.
lot.
It makes it one of the world's most climbed mountains, along with
Wow.
Mount Monadnock. And what people don't know is that while the state owns the parking lot and the state owns a parcel at the top of the mountain, everything in between is privately owned land. And so in order to ensure public access, we've entered into agreement with some landowners to protect that. We're raising money to do that. The deadline is coming up. And I'd ask people to go to our website and take a look at that. And if it's something that's important to them, consider donating to that project.
To forestsociety.org. Click on donate, correct?
Yeah, there's a little
tab?
a little tile on the home page about Mount Major. You can go there and see a video and entertain yourself for hours.
Yeah, and the other causes that you guys have.
Right.
You're always fighting to conserve the beauty of New Hampshire.
That's what we do. That's
yes,
right.
and thank you.